Hello everybody, and welcome to this video, which is kindly sponsored by Squarespace. And today, using Squarespace, I'm going over to the Victualer's Yard. That is the little online web store that I have on the website. And I'm going to change the Rule the Waves 3 giveaway section, which I will be sorting out soon, over to the Great Drac Garage Sale, or Garage Sale, depending on if you're on the east or west side of the Atlantic. Now, what this is going to be about is I have a whole bunch of different bits and pieces, some tabletop wargaming stuff, some naval history stuff, a few other bits and pieces which I either don't need, have duplicates of, or can't justify keeping around anymore. And I thought, well, the stuff that's in good condition, I'm going to give people a chance to acquire. There's a few random grab bags as well, so if you want most of a Baneblade, most of a Predator, and an entire Russian T-35 tank to make some kind of massive kit bash, well, that pack will be in there somewhere. I think there's a bit of a drop pod in there as well. Nonetheless, as you can see, editing this little header is really nice and easy with Squarespace, and there's even the little button that can get you notified in advance. I'm just going to change that to let me know, and the edits are all done nice and easy with Squarespace. So if after all these little mini tutorials I've been doing you think you could build a website for maybe ideally naval history purposes, but you never know, you might want to do it for some other reason, then head over to squarespace.com/Drakenfell. You can get a free trial, and once you're ready, that little link will give you 10% off your first website or domain. So thanks once again to Squarespace for sponsoring the video, and on with the main show. Hello everybody. Today we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to look at an actual World War II artifact that, unbelievably or not, still actually functions, and I'm going to explain some of the background behind it as we go. So you greet me here in the Hall of Armaments, and let's see what we've got in store for us today. So what you see before you today is a PI-4C torpedo detonator, as found in various late model German torpedoes. Specifically, this one is from U-534, and it is the surviving detonator from the surviving Zaukonig II torpedo that they actually have out on display, or, well, will have out on display once the museum is completed. This is a pretty rare thing. There are a number of PI-4 series torpedo detonators around, but the PI-4C, specifically as used in a variety of acoustic homing torpedoes and late generation German torpedoes, has very rarely survived for some obvious reasons. Now, the PI-4 series actually started out with the Italians. The original Italian design, which the Germans labeled PI-4, was then brought into service with the Kriegsmarine for use in the latter stages of the war. Now, the Italian version actually had a brass spinner. So, in response to previous concerns, I'm going to put some gloves on, and of course, this being a German device, where would we be without some nice fancy black leather? So, I'm just going to turn your old PI-4C over here. So, you can see there, it's PI-4C, and this is serial number 117230, for those of you who care about that kind of thing, and that is repeated here on the faceplate, although it's upside down. It's quite a heavy thing, as we will see shortly why that's the case. Now, you might notice the little rubber propeller. Now, I should be cutting in a picture of the Zaukonig II torpedo at the moment, and you'll notice on the top, relatively speaking, of the torpedo, there's a small, relatively circular opening which has been plated over with plastic, polycarbonate. That is where this thing went, because this detonator was only inserted into the torpedo at pretty much the last minute. And when it's inserted into the torpedo, this little propeller here is able to be pushed along by the current, and that activates the rest of the mechanism, which we'll see in a minute. Now, the PI-4 series is a purely mechanical detonator. In the acoustic homing torpedoes, there would be a separate magnetic influence detonator, just in case it went underneath a ship that it was tracking rather than hitting it directly. And the original Italian PI-4 wasn't actually used in active service because their version of this little impeller, which was brass, had a habit of catching on the side of the torpedo while it was being loaded in. And that wasn't necessarily a particularly good thing, because this is what dictates the safety distance, as we'll see in a minute. That was then followed, of course, by the PI-4A, which was used on the G7ES Falcon torpedo. Then you have the PI-4B, which was developed but not used because of various problems they found with the improvement. And then you have the PI-4C, which is this one, and that's used in the Zaukonig and Zaukonig II torpedoes. There was a further development of this torpedo detonator, which included a mechanism for self-destructing if it missed and carried on too far, but that is not represented in this particular device. Now, let's have a look and see what we can actually do with this thing to show you how it works. So, this, as I said, is pretty heavy, and this part fortunately comes off. Now, this is pretty much as it was found in the torpedo. It retained a remarkable degree of sealing until it was unsealed for inspection, and it's still pretty tight. You can actually see how this would have been installed. So it would screw into the torpedo warhead here. This is the bit that would stick out. Then you'd have the little recess and this bit would spin. So, right. A few moments later. Right. So we have the casing and we have the actual mechanism. So first things first, show you inside the casing. So you can see where it's sat. There's a little nut that is just there, and that corresponds to, if I put that down, this little recess just here, and that is how you line up the two parts. Now, looking inside the mechanism itself, get the light in just right. I'll turn it around a bit as well. So you can see there is a worm gear which is attached to this. So if I spin this, you can see the worm gear is turning. The worm quite literally turns. There's actual genuine 1945 grease in there. Right, so that's the casing part. Here is the rest of the mechanism. Now, it is very, very simple. So you've got this part, which is the actual final detonator release. And then you have this weighted section at the bottom, which has a multi-axis element. So you've got this bit, which goes backwards and forwards, and you've got this bit, which goes side to side. Now, unfortunately, while this has survived in remarkably good condition, one or two very small parts haven't. So if you turn it around, you can see there's a spring here, which is holding the main part of the forward and back element of the detonator. But as you can see, over time, it's lost its spring, and some bits of it have loosened up. And if I turn it around this way, you'll see there's a catch here for another bit of another spring, and two horns in there on the left and right section of the detonator, and those would connect to there. And that between those springs and this one actually having some spring in it, that would actually have a degree of resistance. So that would keep this catch, that you can see just here, that would keep this catch in place. And you can see if I move the weight forward, catch comes back. If I pull the weight back, catch goes on. So the whole thing is aligned that way. So when the torpedo hits something, this would go forward. Obviously, the spring restrains it from small movements. And when it goes forward, then as you can see, the catch disengages. And that frees up this little arm here. Now, what does all of this do? And how does that relate to this bit, which is on the back, or front, depending on how you're looking at it, and this? Well, this part is the actual mechanical detonator element. So as I said, this part goes backwards and forwards, it releases the catch. That is what will allow the detonator to be set off. This is the safety element. So this thread, or this rod here, has a thread on it. And that thread is how you set your safety distance, because it goes through to here and it can come out of this gear. And what will happen is this impeller, as it goes through the water, will turn. And as we saw, there's a worm gear there. That worm gear is connected to this gear, which, as you can see, if I turn it, it turns this element. So we can probably just about see, if I bring it closer to the camera, if I turn this, you can probably just about see the rod there moving, in this case back and now forwards. So in this case I'm setting a longer distance, and now if I turn it, I'm reducing the distance before this rod will come back, releasing this hammer, at which point this catch will be the only thing preventing whatever it is that happens afterwards from happening. Now, as I said, unfortunately, because some of the spring elements have not survived, this catch, which would actually be the final detonator element, is pretty much useless. And if you've noticed the small bit of cardboard in the background, there's a reason for that, because if you look in there, there's a rather nasty spiked detonator, or striker pin, basically, and that will hit the explosives, which will set off the warhead. So if we pull this clip back, then, so just to avoid damaging any of the rest of the mechanism, what I can do is rotate this and bring this pin backwards. And as I bring the pin backwards, eventually it will clear this hammer, and then that will basically arm the detonator or the fuse. And because I've already pulled the actual catch back as if it's already hit something, we will get the instant effect of what would happen once it's actually hit something. So let's keep it going. We're about halfway along. And almost there. Oh, it's beginning to move. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why I had that cardboard in place, because as you can see, the detonator pin, the firing pin, leapt straight out, impelled by this rather hefty spring. And yep, that's fired it. And it went rocketing off to one side, where fortunately, of course, instead of explosive, there was cardboard, which it's punched a rather nice hole into. And that is basically how this device worked. It's a very simple spring with an incredibly powerful and incredibly painful pointed firing pin attached to it, which, as you can see, is made up of a mixture of brass and steel. And this thing, obviously, as you can see, hopefully see, is also threaded, so you can very finely adjust exactly what its travel distance is going to be. And then it's just a case of rearming the whole thing now, because obviously this is a working artifact, but an artifact still. So it basically involves putting the spring back in there, putting this back in there, and then carefully, with a wooden dowel, pressing it all down until the arming pin resets, at which point this gets screwed back in again, and the whole thing is made safe. Right, and so, ladies and gentlemen, there we have our reassembled detonator. Everything's primed and in place. Obviously, at some point I could ask U534 if they want to re-include the spring mechanism here, but it's perfectly safe once it's all been done up again. And then it's just simply a case of going, okay, there's our guidance nut. There's our guidance slot. And our torpedo detonator is reassembled and ready to go, although hopefully once more in a controlled environment. So if you would like to receive more information on what's going on with U534, they are actually, in fact, in the process of now building the museum that is going to go around the U-boat. They were curtailed for some time by problems with the council, but then And that's the same council that caused U-534 to be cut into a bunch of pieces years ago. That's not exactly a surprise now, is it? So this detonator, oh, don't touch without the gloves, and its associated artifacts will be on display in the museum once it all reopens at some point in the future. Stay tuned for more updates, and thank you very much for watching.